Hello, I'm going to be talking to you about English law and self-defence, and the subject has been sparked by this case here, which is reported here on the LBC site, but it's all over the place. Backlash as father of two jailed for tackling burglars, but crooks given slap on the wrist. And then it says the fund for him hits, that is the father of two, hits £16,000. As of the making of this video, it's about £75,000. And what happened was that these two people here, these prepossessing young men here in the photograph, Taylor Benford and Ryan Paul, tried to enter Adam White's house in 2019. The house had his wife Lindsay and their two children, who were at the time 10 and 8. And he decided, Mr. White decided, to defend himself. Now, let's see, I can't roll this. Oh, there we go. There's an odd thing here which I don't understand. It says, after the show aired, videos of Ryan Paul boasting about his injuries and involvement in the ordeal surfaced on TikTok. So I don't know what show they're talking about. According to LBC, they're talking about a report in the Mirror. But yeah, I'm sure you can find it anywhere. So his page not available now. It's been taken off. Viewers of the original episode were furious that he was convicted while the would-be burglars Taylor Benford and Ryan Paul received suspended sentences. So, yeah, what happened was these two burglars broke into this guy's house, stole something apparently. He chased after them in his car and he knocked them and he bumped into them and knock them over. The question and he's been given 22 months in jail. Now, that's nearly 2 years. You wouldn't serve that with good behaviour. He'd probably be out in perhaps a year, perhaps a bit less than a year. I'm not entirely sure, but it's not too long. But it's a day is too long for somebody like this, apparently. An honest man who, I mean, I don't know anything about his history, but yeah, in this situation, an honest man who was at home. The home was broken into by two strapping young men, and he took it upon himself to chase them when they were maybe running off with stuff that belonged to him. Now, it reminded me very much of another case. It's the Tony Martin case, where a farmer who lived in an isolated farmhouse in Norfolk. The farmhouse is called Bleak House, by the way, which is like the setup for a really bad novel, isn't it? But it was a really bad thing that happened to him. He said he'd been burgled about 8 times, and one of the items that had been stolen from his house was a grandfather clock. I mean, you don't just slip in through the toilet window and steal a grandfather clock, slip it in your pocket and run off, do you? You have to be able to get in through the front door, or at least out through the front door, and there has to be at least 2 of you and a car to get a grandfather clock out. And there were other things missing. So Tony Martin, who was a solitary sort of chap anyway, which says something about his state of mind, he had been burgled. I think he'd been actually tied up on one situation. There was a group of people in the area which in the newspapers have been referred to as travellers. Right, well, that's as far as I could go with that here, but they were obviously a fairly criminal family, and the young and what happened was Tony Martin chased them out of his house, chased the 2 of them out of his house, shot at them, and actually ended up killing one of them, a 16-year-old Fred Barras. And it turns out, let's have a look at this. Well, I'm not going to read it out, but Barras was, at the age of 16, had been arrested about 8 times and had spent some time in a young offenders institution. And I'm not saying that required the TB shot. I am saying, though, that he was the sort of person who was not much good for the neighbourhood. And obviously, Tony Martin was acquainted with him or the group that he associated himself with. Right, and he was found guilty of murder by a jury. One of the strikes against him was that he had an illegal gun. The Guardian reported him as having an illegal gun. What had actually happened was that he had a legal gun, but during the time he'd had it, the law had been changed about certain types of guns, and he had not applied for a license for that type of gun, which is the type of gun he owned anyway. And it was that sort of a situation. He hadn't applied for a renewal of the license, possibly because he knew he wouldn't get a license, and possibly, and here I'm just speculating, because he knew the police, who were no help at all with the burglaries, would regard it as dangerous for him to own a gun in those circumstances, knowing that he was going to be burgled again. That is what I think happened. And this is a situation where Tony Martin had no confidence in the police because they'd given him no cause to have any confidence in them. And this was in 1999, that's 23 years ago. So, well, 23 years as of the making of this video. So we have a situation here where somebody takes the law into their own hands. Now, the British law allowed, or still allows, people to defend themselves if the house is broken into, but does not allow the householder to then pursue the offenders. And that is that's the problem. That's why Martin was convicted of murder, with the other circumstances of not having a license for the gun he owned and other things. And it's the same operation that's going on here. In this case, Adam White injured these 2 people after they'd committed the burglary, when he was chasing them. Now, why was he chasing them? Well, he was chasing them because he knew the police wouldn't do anything about it. He might have also been chasing them because they had his property, or indeed because he thought that having been interrupted, they would come back and the police wouldn't do anything about it. So although the jury found this man guilty, it is up to the judge to decide on the sentence. And the judge could say something like, well, extenuating circumstances, this shouldn't have happened, but don't do it again, and I'm going to put you on parole for a month or something like that. No, the judge gave him 22 months. I don't know whether the judge was forced to give him 22 months or whether he just decided to do that. But I do know that judges are in collusion with the police. I know that because I got involved in a legal case where the police were, not personally involved, I got involved in the Get Them Out campaign, because the police had set up something, had probably got employed a witness, a provocateur, and then had the case tried out of town in a separate place, and the judge was on record as talking about finding these people guilty before the jury had brought in a verdict, the night before. There were witnesses to that. So it's obvious that the judge was in some sort of collusion with the police to find these people guilty because the police wanted these people out of the way. They were causing the police trouble, not the community, the police, because they were standing up against a particular sort of, well, you might call it corruption in the police force. I'm not going into details on that. So I know that judges are not immune from being taken aside for a quiet chat with a police chief who says something like, you know, this fellow, he's dangerous, we don't want him to get away with it, type of thing. And so I know that happens. They say that there are TikTok videos in which these two young men who did survive the counterattack are boasting about how they're going to get free or get money or sue this person or whatever. They are not nice people. They are apparently serial burglars. But that's not the question. The question is what the law says. The law says if you chase somebody after they've burgled you and when they're running away, then you are guilty of, in this case, dangerous driving or whatever they got him on. It's then up to a court to decide what sort of punishment you should get. And this is where the situation breaks down, because they found him guilty. Well, he was guilty. According to the law, the judge could have ameliorated that and didn't. So when the police ask for sympathy later on, I am a little bit, well, sceptical. That is, I'm not entirely sure that the police didn't have a quiet word with the judge. I can't prove anything, I can't say anything. I'm just saying, based on my experience from a previous case, I believe that this situation could have arisen. So let's have a look at this. So a GoFundMe was set up for Mr. White, and he had to spend £50,000 defending himself because he wasn't going to get legal aid. And they got money, so now I think he's probably covered the legal aid. What he hasn't covered is the stress, aggravation and fear and the sleepless nights that this will have caused him. And in my opinion, this is not reasonable. And why did he do that? Because he knew the police weren't going to help. They could arrest him, but they wouldn't, I was going to swear there, they wouldn't bother themselves to find these robbers. There are several cases on the internet of people who've had their, like there's one case, his motorbike was stolen and he found it and he told the police and they wouldn't come out and do anything about it anyway. And if he'd have tried to get the motorcycle back, I don't remember what happened at the end, but I do know if he forced his way into the garage where the motorcycle was and took it, they'd have probably arrested him for theft. Following the backlash on social media, Bedfordshire Police said the policing and the wider criminal justice system undoubtedly divides opinion. Oh yes, a spokesperson said policing and the... oh gosh. Having determined this, the police are required to build an evidential case to submit to the CPS for consideration of whether there's sufficient evidence and where the public interest lies. And that is the problem. You see, the police had to arrest him for knocking those guys over. They couldn't ignore that. And then they submitted the report to the Crown Prosecution Service, who then have to decide, is this in the public interest to pursue? And the obvious answer is no. But they did anyway, because it's really easy to get at a solid citizen who has a driving offence. And it's not so easy to get at a couple of career criminals who you have to build up a proper case on people who aren't so easily tracked. Taylor Benford and Ryan Paul pleaded guilty to the attempted burglary, while Adam White was found guilty by a jury. In tonight's episode, having considered both the evidence and the context in which the criminal offences were committed, the judge sentenced White to 22 months in prison while giving a suspended sentence to Benford and Paul, recognising they both bore substantial responsibility for themselves for their injuries. All right, so the judge was saying, right, you caused your own injuries, but I'm going to give the other guy a prison sentence as well. And why? Because what the legal system at the moment is concentrating on is not having ordinary citizens taking the law into their own hands. That would bring chaos. But you have to ask why ordinary citizens don't just ring up the police and call them round. Well, they don't do that because they know nothing will happen. So the law is telling people not to defend themselves or find out who's robbing them. But then the law isn't doing anything. Well, that's not reasonable, and you can expect people like Adam White to react. And that's why the law came down on him with like a ton of bricks, or maybe a ton of wigs. Now, so this is what the police say. Our officers work incredibly hard to put criminals before the courts and disrupt their activities, but we know that the outcomes received do not always tell the full story. In this case, there were no winners. Well, I'll tell you what, the least of the winners are the police, because that is another, well, going back to bricks, brick out of the wall of the public support for the police. I mean, I realised the police were in an invidious position at the time. They were on a sort of railway line. They had to do what they had to do. But where they went wrong is not allowing themselves, not putting resources into dealing with things like this. Whereas you get recordings of phone calls where police have rung, women's rights speakers for hate crime. That hate crime thing absolutely needs to be taken off the books right now. It wastes time. It wastes police time. It directs them into the wrong channels, and it directs them into this sort of thing. And this sort of thing is what's going to cause more trouble with the people. Because, for instance, after that case that I was talking about, I happened to be in town and I witnessed a knife fight going on. And after the police came to break it up, they were going around looking for witnesses. And when a police officer started to approach me, I turned my back and walked away. I was just so angry with the police. I wasn't going to be a witness. I wasn't going to help them. Now, I know that was probably the wrong thing to do, but I didn't want to have anything to do with the police. I wasn't even sure they were going to turn against me in some way. I didn't know. That was quite a while ago. And I'm sure there are many people who feel the same as me about cooperating or not cooperating with the police when they're forced in many ways into this sort of behaviour. Just before this video concludes, I want to remind you that I'm Granniopteryx. I'm on YouTube, Rumble, BitChute and Minds. I also am on Twitter, Gab and Parler as @Granniopteryx, and let you know when I've uploaded a new video on Twitter, Gab or Parler @Granniopteryx. Right, you can help my channel by liking, by sharing and by subscribing. You can also help financially. Buy me a coffee or one of the links below. But liking is really important for the algorithm, so please do that. Okay. Back to what I was saying. Adam's partner has taken to social media to warn people against blaming the police. And I mean, she has a point. She says, please do not put the blame on the police for this. Our family have worked hard with the police and the show. The CPS and the judge makes the decisions. That's it. It's the CPS to start with. And the judge could have dealt with it, but he didn't. And it wouldn't surprise me if the fact that he didn't hadn't come from higher up. Yes, there's a huge problem with the policing in Leighton Buzzard, but the individual officers are not to blame. Hopefully this will highlight the problems in the area. The police force are stretched and work incredibly hard. Please be kind. Actually, I think they are probably not working incredibly hard. And the whole system is wearing so threadbare you can see right through it now. All right, well, yeah, that's crime and punishment in the United Kingdom. And it's a lot of it, I have to say, comes from this Racial and Religious Hatred Act and hate crime ideas. They should all go. At least then the police are becoming very unpopular because of that sort of thing. So fewer people are going into the police. I dare say more of them are of lower quality, and fewer people are thinking of cooperating with the police because of situations like that. We do not see the police as our protection anymore. More of this is going to happen, and the ratcheting idea of how the law is applied is going to get tighter and tighter. Right, till next time. Why not treat yourself or a favoured relative or friend to these magnificent examples of merch? The mugs and t-shirts come in the granniopteryx design or Granbo with a firearm or the more deadly knitting needles. Go to www.granniopteryx.com and whatever platform you're watching this on, please click like, subscribe and share.